machine, which, if thoroughly learned and intelligently handled, is a speedy and reliable means of transport under almost all conditions. A motorcycle is made up of a number of parts, each one having its own job. It's a straightforward machine, readily accessible, and certainly not difficult to understand. Let us examine a typical model and get a general idea of how the wheels go round. The tank contains the fuel, petrol, which runs down a pipe to the carburetor. From the carburetor, the petrol is sucked into the cylinder, and a current generated by the magneto is sent along an insulated wire, causing a spark in the sparking plug, which ignites the vaporized petrol and air mixture and pushes down the piston inside the cylinder. This diagram will explain how the four-stroke cycle is applied to the motorcycle. The petrol and air is sucked in, compressed, fired by the spark and pushed out through the exhaust. Induction, compression, power, exhaust. Induction, compression, power, exhaust. The spark at the plug explodes the mixture which pushes down the piston. This in turn pushes down the connecting rod, which is attached to the main shaft which drives the chain connected to the gearbox. From the gearbox, another chain transmits the power to the rear wheel. That gives you a very elementary idea of the workings of a motorcycle. These movements are controlled from the handlebars, so we'll examine the different controls. On the left are three controls: ignition control, exhaust valve lifter, and clutch lever. This is the ignition control lever. It is used to advance or delay the spark which ignites the vaporized petrol, which you saw in the diagram just now. On this machine, you advance by moving it towards you and delay by moving it away from you. On some machines, the actions are reversed. Underneath is the exhaust valve lifter, which raises the exhaust valve off its seat and allows the piston to be moved over compression for starting. This cutaway model shows the exhaust valve on the right as it is being raised off its seating. The exhaust valve closes when the lifter is released. Here is the clutch control. By moving it like this, the clutch becomes disengaged and so allows the rider to change gear. A skeleton clutch shows the action of the clutch plates as they are opened and closed. On the right are three more controls: the air lever, the throttle, the front brake. On top is the air lever controlling the strength of the petrol and air mixture. Toward you is the open position to weaken the mixture for normal running, and away from you is the closed position to enrich the mixture for starting. The throttle control is a handlebar grip which rotates round the handlebar. It governs the speed of the motorcycle. To increase the speed, it must be turned towards you. To decrease the speed, it is turned away from you. The last handlebar control is the front brake. In its normal position, the front brake is off. But gripping it like this operates the brake. In addition to handlebar controls, there are two others. One is the rear brake pedal. This is operated by depressing it in the direction of the ground, and so operating the rear brake. On the other side of the machine is the change gear control lever, which is used to select the gear required. On most machines, the position of this can be adjusted. Neutral and 4 gears are marked on the selector cover. 1, 2, 3, and 4. The gear control lever must work in conjunction with the clutch control. So for each gear change, the rider must declutch and lift the gear lever to the full extent of its travel to select bottom gear. When the gear is engaged, the clutch control is released. Now to change from bottom to second, and so on up to top gear. The only difference is that the gear lever control is depressed instead of lifted. The act of moving the gear lever, as you see in this skeleton box, causes the gear wheels to slide along the shaft, and each time a change is made, a new sequence of gear wheels is engaged. After each engagement, the clutch control is released. The same movements are used through the gear changes until finally top gear is engaged. Now for changing down. The gear control lever is lifted for each change. You will notice that the gear lever is moved to the fullest extent of its travel and with the toe of the boot. The movement of the gear lever to neutral is downward and comparatively short. On some types of machines, the selection of the gears is reversed. With this machine, for instance, you lift to change up into a higher gear and depress to change down. In other words, up for up and down for down. Before we proceed beyond the elementary stages, it must be remembered that all motorcyclists made a similar elementary beginning. Even famous road racing riders had to be taught the whys and wherefores of a machine before they could learn even to ride at all, let alone reach this pinnacle of riding control. This applies also to expert cross-country trials riders, where control is just as vital. Whether it's racing or trials riding, knowledge and concentration are absolute essentials. The foundations of learning to ride must be well laid. A bad habit at the beginning is very difficult to cure, but a good habit is never lost, and it's just as easy to learn. Every one of those fine motorcyclists started his riding career like this, getting the feel of the machine when he got astride it for the first time. This pupil is already finding that the whole secret is a balanced machine with its weight in the right place, on its wheels. This elementary lesson is important because it helps to give the learner self-confidence. By wheeling the motorcycle about, you can get its weight and find that, though it is of course much heavier than a cycle, it is not unwieldy, but a well-balanced machine. As long as you can keep it balanced on its wheels, a motorcycle can be controlled with little strength. But once let it lean too much to one side or another, then strength, and great strength only, can save the situation. There is a right and wrong way of putting the machine on the stand. This is the wrong way, because he's trying to lift the machine. The motorcyclist must learn to manhandle his machine with a minimum of fatigue. It is so much easier to get behind the machine, hold down the stand with your foot, and pull it onto the stand, as the instructor has shown you. But you must be beside the machine with your right foot in front of the stand to pull it forward off the stand. By taking your first trip under man instead of machine power, you can soon learn to keep your balance, because you only have balance to think about. The novice wobbles a bit on his first attempt, which is quite natural, but he still keeps his feet on the footrests. It is surprising how quickly the balance is found, and with that discovery comes your confidence. In addition, at this stage, you will learn to operate the brakes without looking or groping for them. The handlebars and footrests are adjustable, so be sure that they are comfortable. These obviously do not suit this rider. The handlebars are too low, and they should be adjusted. That's much better. They're higher now, so that the grips come naturally to hand. Now for footrests. These are too high. They should be as low as possible to give the greatest comfort and the maximum control. They've been lowered now, and in a position which allows the rider to poise himself on them without pulling on the handlebars. Don't sit with tense muscles and a straight back. This would mean your spine taking all the jolts. So sit well back and relax the muscles. A crouch is perhaps the most apt description. Adopt this position and you'll be able to cover long distances without fatigue. Delay the spark by retarding the ignition. Be sure you are in neutral gear. The kickstarter is next, so lean the machine against your left thigh. Place your foot on the kickstarter and press down so that the kickstarter mechanism is engaged. Continue to press down kickstarter until compression is felt. Just 3 more operations. Lift the exhaust valve lever to release compression. Slightly depress the kickstarter to ease the engine over compression. Release the exhaust valve lifter. With the actual start, he gives a long swinging kick assisted by the whole weight of his body, keeping his foot on the kickstarter and allowing it to return to its normal position. Another start. Full weight of the body, left foot leaving the ground, but don't overbalance. This is better, but he should have held the kickstarter down until the engine fired. Another common fault with beginners is to jab at the starter with the foot sliding off. You can't get a full-length kick, and a backfire can cause a badly bruised or broken leg. It's not difficult if you always give a full-length follow-through kick. Now let's run over the movements again, as a trained motorcyclist does it. The petrol is already turned on. The engine being warm, he doesn't flood the carburetor, or the mixture will be too rich. So open the throttle a little, close the air, retard the ignition, find compression, raise the exhaust valve lifter, ease compression, then a long swinging follow-through kick. Once started, the ignition lever should be fully advanced. When the engine is warmed up, it doesn't take long on most machines, the air control is opened to its full extent. This gives a normal running mixture. Normally, the throttle is now the only necessary control of speed. Turn it towards you to increase the speed and away from you to slow down. When a slow tick over is needed, retard the ignition. Now, for the first time, the learner is going to move the machine under its own power. Again, this should be practiced as a routine. Lift your foot from the ground to the footrest. Declutch. Engage bottom gear and return your right foot to the ground. Now increase the engine speed slightly by opening the throttle. Then let in your clutch, but not suddenly like that. Now, while the rider is restarting, here is a guiding principle for moving off smoothly. As you gradually let in your clutch, gently open your throttle at the same time, and that's what the instructor is telling this rider. The feet should be placed on the footrests immediately you're underway, and as you proceed, resist any temptation to put your feet to the ground. Your throttle now controls your speed. Treat it with respect, open it gently and close it gently, and always avoid the flashy use of the throttle so dear to the young, sporty boy with his first motorcycle. When the instructor leaves you, alone in the cold, hard world, keep your confidence. If you have retained the elementary lessons you've been taught, you have nothing to be afraid of. Once you've got balance, try to memorize where the controls are until you can use them all without any effort. Never slip the clutch. It's used only for stopping and starting, and once underway, for gear changing. To stop at such a low speed as this, you declutch and immediately apply both hand and foot brakes together. Then select neutral. The gentleman vanishes. That's what happens to riders who not only miss neutral, but let their clutch in suddenly. Always engage your clutch gradually. A few straight runs with stopping and restarting after each run will give you good practice in the correct use of your controls, and you'll find that their use will become automatic. Proper use of clutch and throttle gives a smooth start. Now, for stopping, never try to stop the machine with your feet. Let your brakes do that, and only put your feet to the ground when the machine comes to a standstill. Continue practicing this stopping and restarting, and when you're quite confident, you can then leave the straight path and go on to curves. The best start is a wide circle, and this will teach you to control the speed of the machine and balance it at the same time. Be content with the larger circles and curves until you can control your speed without any conscious effort. That is, until you can devote all your attention to balance. When this stage is reached, progress can be made to smaller circles and figure eights. These smaller figures, by their restricted area, will obviously demand a lower speed, and there'll be the temptation to maintain balance by putting the feet to the ground. This temptation must be mastered, because riding feet up will automatically develop a natural balance, which is one of the main points of successful motorcycling. So far, only bottom gear has been used. Gear changing is the next stage. If you have to go on a road for this, choose an open road and a quiet one. Once underway, the second gear is engaged. So that you can see the smoothness of good gear changing, let's see it in slow motion. He slightly opens the throttle, disengages the clutch, simultaneously closing the throttle, and presses down the pedal. The clutch lever is slowly released and the throttle reopened. Once again, open throttle, disengage clutch and close throttle, depress pedal to full extent, release clutch and open throttle. In changing up, always use the sole of your foot, never the heel, and do not stamp, but press and make the movements deliberate. The whole movement should be almost imperceptible. All these principles also apply to changing down, the difference being that most movements are reversed. The gear lever, for instance, is raised with the toe of the boot, and this again must be a deliberate lift and not an upward kick. The sequence of changing down is withdraw clutch and open throttle, raise the pedal and release the clutch. See it again. Withdraw clutch and open throttle, raise the pedal and release the clutch. The stop revives an early lesson, both brakes being applied, and you'll notice that his feet come to the ground as he stops, and not before. He also is experienced enough now to select neutral correctly. This practice in gear changing gives increasing confidence to a rider, and once it has been well mastered, you can devote your whole attention to the road, which may include bends and inclines. At first, keep to a steady speed and on a fairly quiet section of road, and always keep in your own quarter. A word of warning, however, as your confidence increases, do not be tempted to show off. The hallmark of good riding is make all movements in controlling your machine imperceptible, and your progress along the highway unobtrusive. Remember, arterial roads are not racetracks, and roundabouts are made for the safety of road users, and not as a demonstration ground for flashy riders. So don't show off. So another step forward is taken, with the road and light traffic conditions being successfully accomplished. You are now ready to face busy traffic, and there's nothing like a town to give you that. This is where your study of the highway code should be most useful, as in your first busy traffic it is easy to give a wrong signal, like that. You know the system of traffic lights, and if you take it quietly, there is nothing to worry about. You have complete control of your machine, and that gives you confidence. Another point, watch out for street signs, as there are many one-way streets in every town today. Towns are not always built on the level ground. There are often hilly streets on which you may have to stop. Restarting on a hill is therefore an important lesson, but it's better to learn this in the country. The rider is holding his machine with the front brake. The method of getting away is declutch, select bottom gear, transfer the braking to the rear brake, open the throttle, and as the clutch begins to take up the drive, gradually release the brake. This will give you a clean start. Let's see it again. Hold the machine with the front brake, declutch, select bottom gear, transfer the braking to the rear brake, open the throttle, release the brake as the clutch engages, and away you go up the hill. Another lesson has been learned. We'll get back to the level again and try bends and corners. Always remember this. Your speed must be regulated so that you can pull up well within the distance you can see ahead of you. This is most important when taking corners, and you should always have your machine well under control and ride within the limits of safety. This is how a rider should not take a corner. Take particular notice of the path he takes. He is also traveling too fast, making no allowance for taking the corner. He's a danger to himself and other road users. There is a correct path to take on all bends, and speed must be controlled before the corner is reached. Watch the rider's path this time, and see how he finishes in his own quarter of the road. The principles remain the same, whatever the road surface. To control your speed on a corner, apply both brakes well before the bend while you're on an even keel. Similarly, a change down should be made before the corner is taken, so that the machine can be driven round it. Now, here are the principles of path shown diagrammatically. For a left-hand bend, the machine should ease toward but not over the center of the road. As it reaches the corner, it is heeled over to the apex of the bend and returned to its own quarter of the road. This means safety. So often, however, the inexperienced rider keeps close to the left-hand side of the road. The result is that he takes the corner blindly, and if going too fast, will shoot over to the wrong side of the road. Similarly, with a right-hand bend, there is a great temptation to get over to the center of the road and cut the corner. Obviously, this is dangerous to both rider and oncoming traffic. Now see the difference when the correct path is taken. The corner must be approached in the left-hand gutter and the machine kept in the left-hand quarter of the road all the way round the bend. With an S-bend, the principles of cornering remain the same, with this exception. When the initial corner is right-handed, the machine, as already shown, is kept well to the left, but instead of remaining there after taking the corner, it is edged towards the center of the road in preparation for taking the left-hand bend which follows. And that is all there is to safe cornering. Take it easily and deliberately. Practice and experience will enable you to take the correct line and judge the safety limit of all corners. The best way to accomplish this is to follow an experienced rider, and by keeping to his path, you will not only learn correct cornering, but it will add polish to your riding. Sections of 2 to 6 riders will find that by taking it in turn to ride next behind the instructor, much can be learned even in short runs. You too will gain that confidence. Only experience, of course, will teach you many of the things the trained motorcyclist must know. But your practice on actual machines, plus your own keenness, will enable you to take your place amongst the capable and enthusiastic Army riders. Modern motorcycles are strong and reliable machines. They can do almost everything that is asked of them, and then be ready for more. But like every other machine, they must be looked after. In other words, methodical and careful maintenance is the only way to keep them in condition to meet unfailingly the varying conditions and the ruthless demands of war. Sometimes a hard day in the field leaves riders so tired that they want rest more than anything else. But as in pre-mechanized days, riders would attend their horses before themselves, so must motorcyclists attend their wheeled steeds and have them ready for the next day or any sudden emergency. There are vital things on a motorcycle that must be constantly done or checked in this daily inspection. But before a start can be made, the machine must be cleaned. Dirt may hide faults. When cleaning is finished, fill up with petrol. By the way, don't insist on a brimful tank, as vibration and bad surfaces will cause petrol to leak out through the filler cap and so waste precious fuel. Another point, screw the filler cap up tightly. Then top up with oil. A machine only runs well when it's well lubricated. When petrol and oil are filled, you'll be ready to move at a moment's notice if needed. Remember, however, before starting off on your next run, to check the oil circulation by looking at the oil indicator. If one is not fitted, you can generally check the flow of oil from the return pipe in the oil tank. Inspection should follow a definite sequence. Tire pressures must be checked to get the best out of your tires and your machine. On any surface, smooth or rough, level or gradient, the tires must be at their correct pressure. To be sure of correct pressure, check your tires with a gauge. He's put the dust cap on the ground. Never do this. Put the dust cap and gauge either in your pocket or in a safe, clean place. Notice how he gives the inflator a couple of pumps to clear any dust or water which may have got into it. This daily inspection has an important place in the maintenance of a motorcycle because it is a brief check-over to make certain that vital parts are functioning correctly. Now the lights. Just switch on and be sure they're working correctly. And that includes the rear light. Don't forget to switch off. The front forks can be checked by vigorously raising the handlebars up and down. Then it doesn't take long to run over the controls to make sure that they are secure. And look at the Bowden cables for fraying and the possibility of rust. After the handlebars, check over the machine for general security. Such parts as mudguards can be tested in a simple manner. Any looseness will be immediately apparent. The rear chain is the final drive that makes the wheels go round, so check its tension and the spring clip. Since the chain is partially exposed to the elements, lubricate it. Some machines have automatic lubrication, but it is often advisable to augment this with the oil can. It is most important to check over the tools. You never know when you may need them. Then there's the puncture repair outfit. See that it's all present and correct. and check the spares for front and rear chains. A missing link makes a chain useless. Pack your tools away carefully and securely. Many have been known to fall by the way. You see, it's not a long job. It does mean that you can put your machine away confident that it is ready for your next run. The daily inspection can cover only a small percentage of the parts that must be checked and adjusted. So a system has been devised by which the complete machine is thoroughly inspected every week. This is called the task system, and it consists of 6 daily tasks which must be completed every week. Not only does this ensure continual maintenance, but it has the added advantage that the rider learns every part of his machine. There was once a man who thought the task system unnecessary, but not for long. Each task contains a number of definite jobs. For instance, task number 1 is connected with the engine. Inspection is carried out methodically and begins with gas-tight joints. A leakage at the cylinder head joint would be shown by the presence of oil blown out at the joint. If this is covered with dust or mud, it must be wiped to inspect it. And you must inspect it on both sides. The engine mounting follows for security of such parts as the engine plate bolts and crankcase bolts. Be careful not to use too much force on any bolts. Continual over-tightening will stretch them. Nearly always, the presence of oil on a joint indicates the need for investigation. This magneto chain case showed a leakage, and inspection reveals a loose screw. So far, the engine has been checked for security. But what about its running? It may have seemed all right when the machine was on the road at speed, but slow running must also be checked, and in this case it is very uneven. After trying varying positions of the controls, the trouble is traced to the carburetor. This is a job for the fitters. This is how it should have sounded. Your exhaust is a good telltale. Not more than a faint blue smoke should be visible, much too faint for the camera to notice. An indication that oil is getting past the piston is excessive smoke like this, a very bad example. Compression is next. If the kickstarter can be pressed down easily with the throttle wide open, the compression is poor, and it should be reported immediately. When you can stand on the kickstarter with your full weight and cannot depress it, then the compression is good. In a high-efficiency machine like a motorcycle, adjustments are necessarily fine and must be checked. This applies to tappets, and it's quite simple to take off the cover, and when both valves are closed, feel with your fingers if there is too much or too little play. They should revolve easily, but not move up and down. Now let's have a look at task number 2, which deals with engine, lubricating system, and fuel system. If the bolt on a rifle becomes stiff in action, or even jams, it's 100 to 1 that it either hasn't been oiled or the oil is dirty. It only runs smoothly if it is clean and lubricated. The moral is, keep your oil topped up and feel it to test its quality. To add clean oil to dirty oil that has lost its lubricating qualities is useless. Apart from the scheduled change, test the oil regularly and change it before, if necessary. It is not much use having nice, clean oil if it's going to leak out. So see that the crankcase plug is secure and the oil unions. The best way to spot a leak here is to keep them clean. Then you can see immediately if oil is being lost. This task includes the fuel as well as the lubricating system. Make sure the tank is secure, both by checking the tank itself and the securing bolts. Don't strain them, or the result may be a leaking tank. Then the carburetor. See that it is secure on the cylinder and that the float chamber is tight onto the mixing chamber. Finally, see that the carburetor is upright, and at the same time examine for leaks. If you see it dripping, then there is something radically wrong and it must be reported immediately. It's very simple to test for leaks at the petrol tap. If your finger is dry, then obviously the tap is also dry. The same simple test does for petrol pipe unions. Petrol pipes, both flexible and metal, must be checked for chafing and kinks. This one is rubber and has worn against the dynamo strap, and as the damage is severe, it must be changed. As you can see, it has worn deeply. Before the new pipe is fitted, the dynamo strap must be moved round so that it can do no more damage. This, you see, is quite a simple operation. While the new petrol pipe is being fitted, don't forget that there are oil pipes, sometimes flexible, sometimes metal, which must be regularly inspected in the same way as this petrol pipe. By the way, when you replace a petrol pipe, remember to turn on the petrol and test the unions for leaks. That's all right. Nothing difficult about that task. The next, number 3, deals with the ignition system, sparking plugs, charging system, and battery. Here is the mag dyno that produces the spark, that explodes the mixture, that pushes the piston, that revolves the main shaft, that drives the chain, that turns the wheel. Whew. Start by seeing that the mag dyno is securely on its mounting. Then remove the contact breaker cover. It's rather tricky, but not difficult if you don't use force. And see that the inside is clean and free from moisture. A correct spark depends upon the operation of the contact breaker, which you can see moving round, and the points opening. It is when they open that the spark occurs in the sparking plug. The correct gap is therefore vital and should be checked with a feeler gauge attached to the magneto spanner. Replacing the cover is a fiddling job like taking it off, but you'll soon get the knack with practice. From the mag, the spark is carried to the plug by a high-tension wire which runs near the cylinder. Therefore, it needs inspection for chafing or burning, which might cause a short. Having arrived at the plug, our task number 3 says, examine it. It's sparks, not shorts, that engines require. The insulation must be clean because dirty porcelain may cause a short circuit. Whether the insulation is porcelain or mica, it must be kept clean. All plugs should have a gas-tight fit in the cylinder head. With careful inspection of the ignition system, you have gone a long way to retain the efficient running of your machine. That is fine in the daylight. But when you're riding at night, efficient lighting is just as essential. So the battery must be kept charged and in good condition. After all, the battery of a motorcycle receives the same jolts as the machine itself. All the more reason, therefore, that it should be secure and kept clean and topped up. Dirt has even found its way in here and may cause shorts. It's most important that the top of the battery should be kept free from dirt and dry. Though not difficult, it requires patience to get round all the nooks and crannies. Top up with distilled water, not tap water or water from a metal container. It needs sufficient to cover the plates 1/4 inch only. More than this may be spilt by a vibration and road shocks. Before replacing the plugs, make sure that the vent holes are clear so that the gases generated in the battery can escape. Vents, plugs and battery top, all nice and clean. Now the terminal should be checked for security and corrosion. This is as important as it is simple. Finally, smear the terminals well with Vaseline or lanolin to prevent corrosion. If neither is available, then clean the terminals frequently with a dry rag. When the cover is replaced, it must fit properly. As you've seen, dirt, like love, will find a way, and under the best conditions. So don't make its entrance easier by having a badly fitting cover. Make sure that the battery is firm in its cradle. The motorcycle will give it enough jolting, so don't let it suffer a secondary jerking by its being insecurely held. What might be called the control parts of the machine are covered in the 4th task: steering, brakes, wheels and tires. Starting with the handlebars, check the mounting by moving the handlebars up and down. Any looseness will immediately be felt. While there, the handlebar controls can be checked. The twist grip, that's all right. The front brake lever, that is loose. Adjustment is simple. Just screw up until it is secure. With all handlebar controls, you can adjust them to suit your comfort. Air lever, that's all right. Now across to the other side. Ignition lever, exhaust valve lifter, and clutch lever. If a machine developed a wobble like this, the steering assembly would immediately be suspected. Therefore, it should be examined for adjustment. With the shock absorber slackened, the forks should have free up and down movements. Then, by holding the fork link and girder with one hand and rocking with the other, any side play can immediately be felt. All the knurled washers like this should also move freely, but without side play. Now for the main spring. A weak spring like this shows itself by throwing the fork links well out of horizontal. If the tension is correct, the fork links should be almost horizontal. Now you can see the difference when a new spring is fitted. Loss of tension, by the way, only takes place very gradually. The steering head is the last of this assembly, and for this the crankcase must be chocked up. First, completely slacken off the steering damper. Then, by getting in front of the machine and rocking the forks, any play can be felt. There appears to be none here, but if there were, it would have to be reported, as it's not a job for the rider. While the machine is chocked up, have a look at the tires for cuts and uneven wear. The tread is liable to pick up bits on the road. Get them out before they cause a puncture. Hard riding conditions cause strain on the spokes, and they tend to loosen. They should therefore be regularly checked, and any loose spokes must be reported. Don't forget, there are spokes on both sides of the wheel. Now the wheel bearings can be checked for play like this, by rocking the wheel. On a Norton, there should be no side play, but on some machines, there should be a little. To check the front brake, spin the wheel and press the brake lever. If it nearly touches the handlebar, it needs adjusting. The adjustment is quite simple, but keep the wheel spinning to make sure that the brake isn't binding. Now the brake lever has good clearance from the handlebar when it's full on. With the rear brake, the pedal should be at a comfortable height in conjunction with the footrest. This is much too high. It's even worse to have it too low like this, because it would be very difficult to reach. Generally, it should be approximately level with the footrest, like this. To adjust the brake pedal, slacken the locking nut, and to lower it, unscrew the stop until the pedal is in the required position. To raise the pedal, you would naturally screw in the stop. Then tighten the locking nut, and your adjustment is complete. Now you can see the value of correct adjustment. It really can only properly be tested with the foot, which should be able to reach the pedal with a minimum of movement. Incidentally, never ride with your foot on the brake unless you're going to use it. For the brake itself, spin the rear wheel and try it. That seems all right. Nobody likes this sort of thing to happen. The front forks are not working, and he's having a most uncomfortable ride. Seized fork spindles are the cause, probably through lack of lubrication. Lubrication is as important on these control and structural parts as it is in the engine. Now you can see how the well-lubricated and adjusted forks absorb the shocks of the uneven ground and give the rider much greater control of his machine. As a principle, it can be said that any part that moves needs lubricating. Let us run over a few of them, such as the steering head. Be careful here not to over-grease, or it'll find its way onto the steering damper. Always wipe the nipple clean before greasing, and don't forget to wipe the surplus grease off. It only collects dust. That was the steering head. Now the spindles. And there are 6 nipples to ensure that they receive sufficient lubrication. This one needs care, otherwise grease will get onto the shock absorbers. The hub is rather more awkward, but don't neglect to wipe the nipple clean before greasing. Again, avoid over-greasing, otherwise you'll force it through to the brake. The hub is filled in order to grease the bearings which are on each side. This cutaway model shows a correctly packed hub. Some motorcycle hubs cannot be greased with a gun and have to be dismantled and the bearings packed by hand. The filthy condition of this bearing is the result of mud and water getting in. and no amount of greasing can remedy the damage. So, periodically, the hub should be dismantled, cleaned, and repacked. When mud gets into a bearing, it acts as a grinder, with this result: badly worn and with considerable side play. This is how a bearing should look and behave. Easy to revolve, but without any play. Reverting to over-greasing. Nipples which may allow grease to penetrate onto a friction surface should not be treated so vigorously as this brake shoe cam spindle. The grease will get through into the brakes. The wheel, revolving, will spread it onto the linings and render the brakes useless. For general lubrication, the oil can should be used intelligently, neither sparingly nor liberally. Lubrication is to prevent friction on moving parts. Therefore, give each part sufficient for its job, but don't smother it. The lubrication of the handlebar controls and Bowden cables, if done correctly with the finger directing the oil, allows just the right amount for free working and protection from rust. The fifth task deals with the transmission. This includes the primary chain, clutch, gearbox, and rear chain. If you want your machine to run smoothly, the transmission must be smooth. The power of the engine must be transmitted to the rear wheel with the greatest amount of efficiency. Starting at the front, the clutch lever should have free movement. This one is too tight, and the result is a slipping clutch. You'll see that the rider has opened his throttle without any increase of speed. The clutch cable, being badly adjusted, does not allow the clutch plates to close and grip firmly. Now you see the difference. There is more movement, allowing the plates to close completely because there is sufficient free movement at the clutch lever. 1/4 of an inch is enough. With the gearbox, normal running would probably indicate any fault, so lubricate it with the correct grade of oil. Thick oil may cover the filler hole and cause an airlock. Using the oil can prevents this. As power is transmitted from the engine to the gearbox by the primary chain, this chain is vital. Correct tension is most important, and the method of testing it is to feel the adjustment through the inspection hole. Turn over the engine with the kickstarter and test the chain at several different points. With the cover off, you'll be able to see the correct amount of up and down movement, which should be approximately 3/8 of an inch at its tightest point. The primary chain runs in an oil bath, and near the bottom of the case is a level plug which should be removed before topping up. The procedure is to top up with M220 oil until it overflows through the oil level hole. The overflow will show you that the correct bath level has been reached, thus ensuring the lubrication of the chain. When replacing the plug, be careful not to over-tighten and damage the washer. Don't forget to replace the inspection cover, otherwise oil is liable to splash out and dust get in. The rear chain is the final stage of the transmission. We have taken off the guard. If the chain is loose, it would give jerky transmission and increased wear. This chain is obviously in need of adjustment. The hexagon and the adjuster bolt on both sides of the rear wheel are the means of adjustment. As both sides are similar, we'll show you only one side. The hexagons are loosened. The locking nut on the adjuster bolt is slackened, and the adjuster bolt is screwed in and the turns noted until the wheel has moved far enough back to take up the slack in the chain. The correct amount of up and down movement, about 3/4 of an inch, is taken midway between the gearbox and rear wheel sprockets and at the tightest point of the chain. The lock nut is now tightened, the adjuster screw on the other side screwed in the same amount of turns, and the hexagons tightened. As the wheel has been moved rearwards, don't forget to check the brake rod adjustment. Whenever the chains are adjusted, it is always essential to check the alignment of front and rear wheels by means of a straight-edged board. The alignment correct, give the hexagons a final tighten. And so to task number 6, which deals with frame, fittings, lamps, horn, and general items. It's rather like looking over a house to check over the fixtures and fittings. Brazed or welded joints should be wiped so that you can see signs of cracks, or rust, which would indicate the beginnings of a faulty joint. Any looseness in a joint would cause the paint to crack and allow rust to form. You can therefore see the value of wiping before inspecting. Lack of careful inspection would have overlooked this battery cradle joint, with the possible loss of the battery. Apart from the frame itself, there are many fittings attached to the frame by lugs. Pillion footrests, prop stand. These are subject to damage which might pass unnoticed except for a regular inspection. The security of bolts and nuts must be checked because a motorcycle has tough work to do and nuts may loosen. As you know, vibration and road shocks tend to loosen nuts and bolts, and constant inspection is necessary. Spanners should be used to check security and should never be forced. As you see, the pressure is firm and just great enough for the particular nut or bolt. A cylinder head nut stands up to considerable force, but using the same force on a petrol union may cause considerable damage, such as this. The amount of purchase afforded by a long ring spanner may result in stripped threads. This ring spanner, though of small gauge, is long and can soon cause irreparable damage to threads. Look at that for a stripped thread. Another point, use a spanner of the exact gauge required. If the spanner gauge is greater than the nut, the corners will soon be worn, and so will your knuckles. In addition, the correct spanner should be used for each job. For instance, these two spanners fit the same size nuts. The large one should be used, for example, on a holding down nut, which is designed for greater tension. The smaller spanner would naturally be used, say, on a union where there is less tension. You should be able to feel the tightness of a nut or union. The basic principle of tightening or adjusting is the intelligent use of tools. There are a host of hints and tips which you will learn from your instructor or by experience, and many of them will add considerably to the comfort of your journeys, as, for instance, the correct way to adjust your shock absorbers. There is nothing involved in the task system. In fact, it is as straightforward as it is essential, because it has been devised to ensure that every part of the machine is regularly examined in a methodical rotation. The system is flexible, but all the 6 tasks must be carried out on your machine every week. And then you'll keep your machine up to concert pitch. so that it will unfailingly respond to all the demands you may make of it. Motorcyclists are cheerful folk, at least those who, through regular maintenance, keep their machines in fine fettle. Theirs are the smiles of men who know their tasks, but above all, carry them out. The riding technique required for ordinary road conditions is, generally speaking, one of smooth and effortless control. Riders sit their machines with hands poised on the handlebars and with saddles and footrests taking the weight. On rough roads, the footrests take most of the weight. On smooth roads, the saddle. Under normal cross-country conditions, this same technique will apply, and leaving the road does not always mean leaving road technique. So long as the surface is fairly even, the normal riding position should be adopted, though speed, of course, is reduced, but you must keep your eyes open for sudden changes in surface conditions. Even where a path becomes boulder-strewn, it is often possible to avoid obstacles and continue seated if you select your path well in advance, and that applies to cart tracks as well. Some cross-country work, however, calls for quite a different riding technique, which is to rise from the saddle and poise on the footrests. By poising on the footrests, the whole weight is transferred to the lowest possible point of the machine. The rider is then able to absorb the shock with his legs and is also able to retain control of his machine. His legs are not rigid, but slightly bent at the knees. His arms are relaxed, yet the handlebars are held firmly. But when he sits on the saddle, he is jolted and bumped with complete discomfort and eventual exhaustion. By standing, the weight is taken easily on the footrests, the body is relaxed, not rigid. Another point about sitting is the loss of control. The machine steers the rider. But when he stands, he can control his machine by using his body to maintain balance. Balance is one of the most important things in riding technique, and this is a very useful exercise for improving it. It is not difficult to acquire balance in the elementary stages of motorcycling, but it can only be improved by practice. It's a good idea to start with tins placed in a straight line and keep your speed as low as possible, using only the throttle and never the clutch to control it. When you can do this, you can try an irregular line with obstacles at unequal distances. In this, the rider steers the machine not only with the handlebars, but with the aid of his body as well. Therefore, the body must be relaxed, so that it can easily and quickly be moved from side to side, and the rider can make his machine take the path he wants. The value of practicing this will be found when a more advanced stage is reached in controlling the skids and lunges of the machine on mud and slippery surfaces. Watch his shoulders and body movements as he urges the machine round the stones. In addition to balance and riding position, throttle control is vital. In fact, it might be called the keystone of cross-country riding. You can see the amount of movement on the twist grip by the indicator that has been fixed. The machine is on slippery ground. The rider is inexperienced. See what happens when he's told to move off. The only part of that performance that was right was the selection of bottom gear. Let's see what he does wrong. Revs his engine up too much and bangs in his clutch. The result is wheel spin and disaster. It's really quite simple to get away smoothly, even on such a slippery surface. Select bottom gear, open the throttle a little, gradually let in the clutch, and as it takes up the drive, gently increase the engine power. The result is wheel grip. Throttle control is vital. The rider on the left bangs open his throttle and loses control. The one on the right uses throttle control and gets away perfectly. Level ground is one thing, but a slippery hill is quite another matter. This rider is approaching the slippery hill slowly and sedately. He has not enough speed to give the necessary momentum to carry him up, and as soon as he starts to climb, the gradient wins. You can't afford to be too sedate in cross-country work. Let's see him do it again. It is wrong to approach a slippery hill slowly and then accelerate on the slope itself. The approach should be fast enough to carry the machine to the top. Should, on the gradient, wheel spin threaten, the throttle can be eased back to overcome the spin and retain wheel grip, but not sufficient to retard the speed of the machine. But if you should run into a slippery or greasy patch, don't bang open the throttle or you'll get wheel spin. And don't grab the clutch or there'll be nothing to hold your rear wheel. Your slippery climb will come to a sticky end. A failure on a hill usually means a return to the bottom and a fresh start. When you fail on a normal slope, close the throttle and lay the machine gently down on the footrest to hold it. Then, holding the front brake, lift the machine. Release the front brake and the machine will be held by compression. Checking with the front brake, ease the exhaust valve lifter, get the machine at right angles to the hill and leaned into it all the time. Put your foot on the footrest, not on the ground. Apply the front brake and work the handlebars until the machine points downhill. Then, by releasing the front brake and easing the exhaust valve lifter, but under no circumstances touching the clutch lever, allow the machine to descend the hill. He has obeyed the 3 golden rules: throttle closed, bottom gear engaged, descent by exhaust valve lifter. It would be a good idea to show you the complete climb, failure and descent which you've just seen in detail. A fast approach to get a good run up. Close the throttle, lay the machine down. Hold the front brake, raise it, get it at right angles to the hill, place the right foot on the footrest, work the handlebars until the machine is pointing downhill, and descend on the exhaust valve lifter. Remember, the clutch must not be touched during the whole operation. With a steep gradient, the tactics have to be somewhat different from those used on a normal gradient. But first, here are 1 or 2 important points. When laying a machine down on a hill, lay it out of line with the hill in a position where it will remain on the footrest and not topple over, like this. It is better, where possible, to lay it down on the left side with the gear change lever uppermost. This is the ideal position for a machine to be pegged on its footrest. 2 further points. Before mounting a machine for the descent, be sure you're in bottom gear. And put your right foot on the footrest, not on the ground, or you'll overbalance and roll down the hill instead of riding down. Now let us go through a failure, turn and descent on this steep gradient. When a failure is obvious, close the throttle and peg the machine on the footrest. This holds the machine so that you can walk round and grasp the handlebar to prevent the machine falling over. And with the mudguard stay, pull the machine round using the footrest as a pivot. When it is facing downhill, make sure bottom gear is engaged. Then, with the front brake on, place your foot on the footrest and, locking the front wheel into the hill, raise the machine. Now, simultaneously, raise the exhaust lifter, straighten the front wheel, and release the brake. The descent is made on the exhaust lifter with the throttle closed. Remember, you're in bottom gear and have the braking power of the engine. That wasn't very difficult, was it? Let's see it once more, and watch the points very carefully. Fast approach. Throttle closed. Lay it on the footrest. Pull it round by the mudguard stay, steadying the machine with the handlebar. Be sure it's in bottom gear. Front brake on, foot on footrest, front brake off, valve lifter up, and down the hill. As in the previous climb, the clutch was not touched, and must never be. Sometimes conditions arise that demand the use of brakes, a bend on a hill, for instance. Don't allow the initial speed to be faster than is necessary for the bend. Once underway, you cannot slow down, but you can control your speed. The weight of both machine and rider is transferred to the front wheel, so the braking power is roughly 75% on the front brake and 25% on the rear. By using the exhaust valve lifter and by careful application of the brakes, the rider can get his machine round the bend without trouble. That's how it should be done. But so often, this is what happens. The rear brake is applied too hard, the wheel is locked, and the machine skids round out of control. The same thing can happen when the front brake is applied too hard and the wheel is locked. The rider must feel his brakes and apply them just sufficiently to hold the machine, but not so much as to lock the wheels. Remember, the front wheel carries more weight going downhill, and with the resulting extra grip, you should apply 75% of braking to the front wheel and 25% to the rear. The amount of braking varies with conditions, but on a treacherous surface, use them delicately. Now, there are times when brakes are of little use, where the surface is greasy or slimy. The wheels would have no grip at all, and the machine would just skid down out of control. This rider foolishly thought his rear brake would hold, and went down with his wheel locked. Had his front brake been on, he would have had a nasty fall. One of the secrets of descending a steep hill safely is always keep the initial speed of the machine well down and be in bottom gear. Use the exhaust valve lifter and both brakes. But as soon as you feel the speed beginning to increase or the wheel skidding, slew the machine round on its right footrest, which will peg it safely on the hill. Keep the left foot on the footrest, you'll need it for the rear brake, and it'll help you to balance the machine. Now the descent. Get in a comfortable position, with the rear brake off and the front brake on, work the handlebars, ease the footrest just out of the ground, and the front wheel will slide down. To get the rear wheel to slide down, release the front brake and apply the rear brake. Here is the principle. When you want the rear wheel to slide, apply the rear brake. When you want the front wheel to slide, apply the front brake. You must control the slides with your footrest. Front brake on, front wheel down. Front brake off, rear on, and rear wheel down. Front brake on and front wheel down. Keep the footrest dug in, and when nearing the bottom, get the machine pointing downhill and finish the descent on the exhaust valve lifter. The rider has negotiated a very steep and slippery descent without once losing control. A little run won't do us any harm after those rather concentrated lessons, so we'll have a short trip through the country. Winter time is a grand time for riding, provided it's dry, of course. Just now we're going to find some water to show you how to negotiate shallow and deep crossings. A motorcycle is not an amphibian. It must have solid ground under it. A shallow stream with a firm bed can usually be ridden across, though shallow streams can be crossed with little danger of the water entering the magneto, say where the high-tension cable enters the pickup. It's always better on cross-country riding to have your machine prepared for any type of water splash. The procedure is quite simple. Unscrew the cable and apply tape round the cable and the knurled Bakelite screw. This one has a rubber cover over it. Be sure that the cable is well covered and the tape fits closely. When the cable is replaced, screw it firmly into the pickup brush holder. The tape by itself is not sufficient. It must be waterproofed with grease, which should go from the top of the tape and must completely cover the joint where the cable enters the pickup brush holder. And don't forget the back of the cable. The contact breaker cover and breather hole should be protected with grease. As condensation may form, the hole should not be left covered for more than a few hours. Just a little grease over the hole, and then turn the cover round until the hole is under the clip. The cover joint is the last operation. Smear the grease all round to make a watertight joint. And now, let's tackle some water. The first thing to do is to inspect the crossing. From the bank, a rider will be able to see what the possibilities are and make up his mind what to do. It's not difficult to judge that this stream is shallow enough for a machine to be ridden across, providing the bottom is firm enough. Water must always be taken slowly, so as to cause as little disturbance in it as possible. Taking it fast would create a bow wave, which would drown the engine and put it out of action. Bottom gear is always used, so enter the water gently and feel your way across. You notice how the water is parted to allow the engine through. If the water is deep enough to cover the exhaust, keep the engine running just fast enough to overcome the back pressure in the silencer. But slip the clutch in order not to increase your speed. Remember, always go as slowly as possible, keeping, of course, your balance. Leaving the water, in this case, presents no difficulty with such a good surface. But with mud, acceleration must take place before the rear wheel leaves the stream. Every advantage must be taken of the wheel grip afforded by the stream bed to take you up the slippery bank. The same principle applies to a steep bank. Accelerate to take your machine up the slope, but do it while your rear wheel has the grip given by the river bed. You've already been told about taking a crossing slowly. This is what happens when it's taken at speed. Not only is the machine drowned, but the rider is wet. Very wet indeed. This rider doesn't seem to have taken it to heart very much, but then he was only demonstrating this bad technique for your benefit. Riding across streams is quite easy so long as you know how, and you should do by now. What you've seen is all right with shallow streams, but with anything really deep, most machines have to be pushed across. In either event, a rider should inspect the crossing before deciding on his tactics. With a muddy bottom, the water is usually thick, and to find out the depth, firmness of the bottom and any obstructions, you must wade in. In this stream, depth is the only thing he has to worry about, and as there's a possibility of water entering the carburetor, this must be dealt with. So plug the carburetor intake with rag and see that it fits tightly. Then, as water can also reach the engine via the exhaust pipe, plug the end with another rag. There's only one thing more to do. In order to close both the inlet and exhaust valves, find compression. Everything is now ready for the crossing, which is a straightforward man-handling job. The rider takes the machine by the handlebars and saddle, and he just keeps pushing across. Not too difficult, was it? Now, to get the engine going again is quite simple. Take the rags from the exhaust and the carburetor. As the engine has naturally cooled off, the carburetor must be flooded, and this will help to give a quick start. A word of caution. Whether the machine has been pushed or ridden across the stream, water is bound to have entered the brake drums. For a short distance, therefore, lightly apply the brakes, front and rear. The gentle friction should soon dry the drum and brake linings. This is what happened to the man who did not dry his brakes. What you have seen is really the elementary stages of cross-country work. None of it is easy at first, but as you saw, all the hazards can be overcome by training and intelligent handling of the machine. It is this that is particularly needed in advanced riding. And that brings us to some nice, thick, sticky mud. Mud, like every other hazard, has its own technique. Perhaps the best way of learning this is to see how an inexperienced rider tackles the mud and then learn from his mistakes. Slowly and serenely he approaches the muddy stretch. And quickly and surely he gets stuck. The experienced rider knows that thick mud must be taken fast, as it offers so much resistance and little wheel grip. Speed helps to cleave a path and keep the machine on a straight course. You notice that he's poised on the footrests, controlling the lunges with his body. So much for thick mud. If liquid mud is tackled in the same fast way, the result is a mud bath. That would have been all right for a comedy film, but it's just bad riding in serious motorcycling. Liquid mud demands roughly the same technique as shallow water. The good rider, before he tackles anything, surveys the ground ahead, weighs up the situation, and decides the tactics to adopt. It should be taken slowly in bottom gear, retaining sufficient momentum to get through. You saw the difference? No filthy splashing, but a well-controlled crossing. Now watch him control his machine with his body, and note carefully his shoulder movements, always the hallmark of a good rider. In difficulty, the good rider knows what to do. When power cannot overcome the resistance of mud, or ruts are too bad, he drops onto the saddle and uses his feet to assist the machine along. The important points are to use your feet before the machine gets stuck, and to keep as much weight on the saddle to give as much wheel grip as possible. Footing, as it is called, is not child's play, and its achievement requires determination and timing. Always try to keep the machine moving forward and get the most out of it. Now we'll try a gully. The tendency is for the front wheel to get out of control and mount the bank. you must try and keep the front wheel in the lowest part of the track where it will be easiest to control and make it go where you want it to. The rear wheel will automatically follow. Speed is a great aid to keeping on a straight but narrow path, but don't go faster than you can control your machine. The last type of hazard deals with a rocky ascent. The good rider, having automatically looked ahead and seen the conditions, approaches slowly, poised on the footrests, and chooses his path, avoiding the rocks in his way. Sometimes, of course, rocks cannot be avoided, and the inexperienced rider thinks that taking them at an angle will lessen their obstruction, while in practice, the front wheel just slides off and the machine falls on its side. Well, he wouldn't have been if he'd known the correct method. We fixed some sleepers to form a practice step. This hazard must be taken squarely. To avoid damage to tires and wheels, take it as slowly as it will allow. Slow motion enables you to see how the crankcase clears the obstacle because the machine takes it squarely. Here's an even better view, and you'll notice also the rider's legs are relaxed to absorb the shock. The machine takes the shock of the step. The rider, in his poised position, retains complete control. Back on the natural climb, you'll see the throttle control as the machine takes the step. This shows you the speed at which a step on a gradient can be taken when a rider is poised on the footrests. There can be little control when a rider sits his machine on rough going. You can see the difference when the rider is poised on the footrests and uses his body to help control the machine. This position is essential on hazardous ground, but when you come to smooth going, drop down on the saddle and relax until the next difficult surface presents itself. These relaxations enable long stretches to be covered without undue fatigue. The Army rider's job is to get there, and though footing should be avoided as far as possible, feet should be used lustily when the safety of man or machine is at stake. Cross-country riding must play a vital part in Army motorcycling, and every one of the hazards you have seen and the type of country you're looking at now may be met under active service conditions. Gradients, rough going, water, mud, everything that is found off the road has at some time to be negotiated. For these, the trained and intelligent rider has no fear. You have seen how hazards can be conquered, so long as you know the proper way of tackling them. To go blindly at them without thought or knowledge is asking for trouble. To approach each obstacle, sure of yourself and your machine, is to overcome them. The principles of cross-country riding are briefly: look ahead and quickly appreciate the hazard. Decide the tactics you will employ and carry out your decision with confidence and determination.